Now, on the surface, you can understand why people come to this conclusion, though it's interesting that no one drew this conclusion for the first 3 centuries of church history. No one. It wasn't until St. Augustine came up with this interpretation that it became very influential, and now it's hard for people to find a different interpretation. But you can see how people come to this conclusion. In fact, I came to this conclusion for several years while I was in seminary. I simply couldn't figure out any other way of interpreting Romans 9. God must determine who goes to heaven and who goes to hell and everything in between. It's what Scripture teaches. I guess it's what I got to believe. So I get why sincere people come to this conclusion. I even admire them because it's not an easy thing to believe, and it shows their trust in Scripture that they'll believe something which is, I find, so unpalatable, but they believe it because they sincerely believe this is what the Bible teaches. What I have never been able to understand is how people enjoy it. Because even when I believed it, I didn't enjoy it. I mean, the folks who hold this view, they would say, oh, God's all glorious, He's all beautiful, His majesty, He determines all things, and it's all for His glory. Even the people who suffer in hell, it's all decreed for His glory, and it's altogether lovely and beautiful. And I could never get in on that. Even when I believed it, it struck me as, frankly, ugly and terrifying. And you're not supposed to say that, or even think that, because it might mean that you're not one of God's elect. Maybe you're one of the reprobate, the vessels of wrath. But if I was honest with myself and with God, it was ugly. And I couldn't get in the joy of this. I at the time had 2 young children. One was just a newborn. And I thought to myself, for all I know, those, my precious babies that I love so dearly, are created for the sole purpose of suffering endlessly and hopelessly in exquisite pain for all eternity for the glory of God. And I am supposed to, if I'm one of God's elect, I'm supposed to say, God, you are all the more glorious for having decided to show forth your power and wrath on my 2 lovely children. An eternity ago, before they're ever born. And now I feel bad for having brought them into existence. I'm the means by which they're going to suffer forever. How do I say that's beautiful or glorious? I never got that. And then I never got the joy of being one of God's elect either. Yeah, I'm in, but my kids are out. It takes away the joy a little bit. Or how do you have this assurance? People would say, talk about this eternal security. I didn't find any security in this. Because for all I know, God is determined. Right now I'm a believer. Right now I'm one of God's elect. Or at least I look like I'm one of God's elect. But how do I know that in 10 years God hasn't destined me to walk away from the faith, give up on Jesus Christ, and become a total pagan? People do that, you know. And if God's determining everything, they do it because God determined them to do it. And if God determined it for them, how do I know He didn't determine it for me? He makes people look like they're elect, and boom, they end up. In fact, St. Augustine once worried about this fellow monk of his who was a monk up till the age of 74 and then ran off with this young nun. And he said, well, I guess he wasn't one of God's elect after all. But man, you go your whole life up to 74 looking like one of God's elect, and then you blow it. And you blew it because God decreed that you would blow it. So how do I know that God hasn't decreed that I'm going to blow it? I have no security at all. There's no security in this. And if that's what's destined for me, well, there's not a damn thing I can do about it. Because I'm damned. I mean, what do you do? Okay. So I couldn't get into this. It's all glorious and all wonderful. And that is, I guess, what led me to keep on searching.